If you overtrain certain tissues, if the tissues or your muscles are sore for days on end, it's going to lead to injury. Then, like we said, surgery, hopefully not, but that will inevitably be effect for most people. And then it's just compensations and long-term deterioration in your body.
Right.
Yeah.
And I even like to think of it as there's insults and then there's injury.
Because if you are not familiar with a speed of a movement or any different types of movement, it will increase the risk for injury.
Yeah.
From there.
And even just as far as shoveling goes, just so that maybe you have an example, would be taking and leaning to grab a medicine ball and then throwing it back up against a wall. So that trains resistance at the end of the range of motion. It adds some ballistic component to it. And then obviously the, flinging of whatever you're shoveling a certain way is you throwing that medicine ball back at the wall, and then train both sides like you talked about.
Welcome to the Functional Code, your go-to source for decoding optimal health. Join Dr. Addy and Dr. Jace as they break down the science behind pain, performance, longevity, and more, making complex concepts easy for you to understand and apply in your life. Your journey to a healthier you begins with understanding the Functional Code.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Functional Code, episode 34. Today, we are diving into how to bulletproof your body as a lifelong manual labor worker. We're talking construction workers. We're talking those that are putting their bodies on the line every single day to produce and to provide. And as someone who's done construction for many years, I know what it takes. I know what kind of work and strain it puts on the body. And I think there is definitely better ways to prevent any types of injuries moving forward and creating longevity while you're trying to also stay in this industry and career. So we're excited to bring to you a bunch of great information today. And as always, I am Dr. Addy.
And I'm Dr. Jace. Yeah, we're super excited. We just want to preface this that we respect everyone that is in all these lines of work. It's tough work and it's stuff that needs to get done for our society.
Absolutely.
So that's where we felt like it was one of those things where we wanted to give back and try to give as many helpful tips from our point of view. I know for myself, I haven't had as much experience in the field, but there's a lot of stuff that I've worked with patients with that has helped them throughout their career and long-term too. So
absolutely.
Today we're going to be diving into the long-term effects on the body. We're going to dive into the physical and mental side. We're also going to go into certain ways that you can strengthen and create change outside of work and even during work. And then we're going to look at work ergonomics, long-term health planning, and body maintenance. So as we go into some of this, by all means, please like, share, subscribe. There's going to be more of these coming down the road. But if this is something that resonates with you, or if you know anyone that is in this field, by all means, share. This is something that we don't, when I looked at a bunch of YouTube videos just on these topics, there's not many, if at all, that will go into as depth as we're going to go today.
As always, I think this is going to be a podcast that not many people will talk about because we're really good at finding these unique things to talk about. But I think it's needed. I don't feel many people, especially in this field, has ever been given a care plan or some type of expectation on how to maintain their body in this kind of industry. And I don't know, I've never seen it done myself. So it's been fun to create, obviously, for those out there. And it's really going to help. It really is when you break it down. And it's something you may have to add in as far as things you've never done before. But there's a lot of things in here that I think are simple switches that will make a lot of difference that you maybe didn't think about before.
Absolutely. Especially if those that feel almost too prideful to go to someone for help, whether it's a physician or body coach, just for the maintenance of their body until it gets to a certain point.
Yes.
Like if that is the case, if that is something, then this is definitely for them.
Good point.
For a byproduct thereof.
So, Doc, I know a lot of us, like you said, if you're maybe not familiar with certain parts of the industry, we want to first, we were trying to figure out where would be the top 8 unique jobs that perform manual labor consistently. So we asked AI to give us an idea of really who is working every single day, putting their body out there And what kinds of industries are these people existing in? So, Doc, where are the manual laborers, I guess, as far as commonalities in the United States?
Absolutely. And if your job doesn't fall into any of these 8, obviously there's more. Anytime you put stress on the body for longer periods of time in different positions, this all will pertain to you as well. But as we start off, the first one that always comes to our mind is construction workers. It's those people on the side of the road that are doing hard work in treacherous, whether I know from us being up from up north,
whether it's cold or hot,
man, and now we're seeing it in that extreme heat. So I know we've seen both sides of things. So we're going to dive into a few strategies for you guys in different types of weathers as well. And that'll be in the later part of the podcast. Next one, we have farm workers. Obviously planting, harvesting, there's livestock. There's just a lot of grunt work that needs to get done and a lot of lawn hours put in. Then warehouse workers, from loading trucks to doing mundane, repetitive tasks over and over again, to lifting heavy objects, machinery. Next one, we have then landscapers, groundskeepers, whether it's bending over, doing anything landscaping on the ground or up overhead. That'll affect different parts of the body. Janitors and cleaners, a huge respect for janitors. They don't get the respect they deserve in cleaning and putting up with some people.
And just the amount of work. I mean.
And then we're going to round out with a couple more here. Carpenters, painters, whether it's you're on your knees doing work on flooring, or painters up overhead, constant repetitive work with the shoulders. Then we have masonry workers, which I definitely didn't think about that. Brick, stones, concretes, lifting heavy materials, what have you with that. So as the job field shifts towards newer landscape, especially with new technology coming into fruition, and our society is changing now over time. But when you look at, when you pick a job, when you first start off with, or if you stay with a job, whether it's at a high school, at a college, or just a career change path, there's going to be different effects on the body and the mind. But as we look at, especially long-term effects on the body, you want to make sure that if you're currently in a hard labor job or are about to start, that you're aware of the long-term implications, and also how can you plan and schedule out different ways to maintain your whole system. So, Doc, what are some of the long-term effects on the body, especially the musculoskeletal, like just the body itself?
And I broke it down into different areas of the body that tend to take a beating compared to others, especially when you're more than likely expending a lot of energy with your, especially working with your hands. I added in wrists, shoulders, those kinds of things. But obviously, if you're manual labor, you're going to be on your feet a lot. So knees. I really threw in everything I could find when it came to what these workers are more than likely going to be experiencing as far as statistics and just what to expect too. Let's say you're just getting into the industry. What are these kinds of rates looking like for you, and why should you start thinking about maintenance and preventing these kinds of things from popping up? Because unfortunately, you're at a higher risk of developing a lot of these issues. Number one, just in regards to musculoskeletal disorders, 60% reported some type of pain, whether that's back pain, neck pain, joint problems. And that was probably, in my opinion, an underrated study. With those studies, it's tough because a lot of the times it's a retrospective study that they're just trying to gain like a survey. And some of them are probably like, the pain isn't enough to report on this survey, but they've more than likely had it. So 60% to me, even though that's the best we have, I bet you is low. I bet you more experience a lot of issues. And just knowing that, that's something that you obviously should be thinking about. As far as breakdown, back pain alone was 40%. You're going to be lifting and on your feet a lot. And especially if you don't have good footwear and you're either just functionally imbalanced, you either have wearing and tearing on one side of the body versus the other, we're going to compensate. Eventually, it's going to find its way up to the core, the back, and that's usually what will exist with these kinds of workers. Disability rates, at least 15% of manual labor workers that were surveyed reported significant disability due to issues of work.
Wow.
That's high for me. And that's worrisome because, again, if that is your job and providing for who you have to provide for, let alone yourself, and that could possibly be something that you might have to deal with as far as just statistical chance, something you have to prepare for. As far as work-related injuries, 1 in 10 reported injuries on the job. And that could be from a whole host of things, not only just safety, but just so people understand, it's still relatively high compared to other industries. As far as surgery, it shows that around 10 to 15% of laborers who experienced back pain eventually required surgery. Now, required is a word that maybe we want to take lightly, subjectively. Did they really need it? We can argue, both Doc and I are going to argue that. But in this survey, it was reported that they received it because they were deemed necessary to have it.
And even with that too, we've heard stories of like people saying they need surgery and the joints are pretty darn good with mild arthritis. Like you have to pay attention to maybe getting multiple opinions on that, but that's why and where we're coming from on that.
For sure. And I think it's important to know because the second that surgery happens, you're already going to be a different person with in regards to the strength of that back. And so for someone who needs it, just be cautious. And we've talked a lot about that in our past podcast. So if you guys want to jump back and go over that, please do, because there's a lot of good information that we've gone over in certain episodes regarding it. And if you need questions on which ones to go to, just let us know, because we'd love to drop that in any of the comment sections. So I threw in just different expectations and rates of surgery with different parts of the body. So knee surgery, 5 to 10% reported having it. Joint replacements anywhere from 2 to 3 times higher than other occupations. Carpal tunnel up to 5 times higher, especially if you're going to be working with your hands. Shoulder surgery about 1.5 times higher than other manual labor occupations. So it's not, that one wasn't as high. Rotator cuff surgery is pretty common in the population, let alone what you're doing. That's just, that one's not going to be too much different than the population. But spinal surgeries, they said anywhere from 20 to up to 30% higher than normal. And then herniated disc can be up to twice as high in versus non-manual labor positions. And for those of you who have never had a herniated disc or disc issue, it is excruciatingly painful for some. It can be debilitating and it can last a very long time. And it can be something that will persist if not handled correctly at the initial event.
Yes.
And we know that we've heard this because patients will tell us this all the time. They say, my back usually goes out a couple times a year and I come in and I get things taken care of up to a point that where it's tolerable for them, which tolerable, I like to argue that even it's manageable to a point, but they're still having to change certain parts of their life because of this pain. So now they can maybe get back to work, but it's different. They're maybe taking it lighter. They're maybe having people work or do some certain duties because they just are trying to take it easy. And had they just put the effort in initially, a good 2, 3, 4, 5, even 6-month care plan, depending on how excruciatingly severe the issue is, they wouldn't have this issue of their back going out every so often.
Yeah, even if you're not in pain, you still need maintenance long-term. Ours says the pain is the last thing to present itself. And for such a hard job and hard demand on the body, you're going to need something long-term, regardless of how you feel, but for the maintenance.
But especially for these too. These work. Yeah,
yes.
I totally agree. And we'll get to what that looks like soon enough when we dive into the maintenance of the body portion of this podcast. But lifelong effects, you have, this one study showed an increased risk of disability, with studies showing that over 50% experience some type of limitation by retirement age, whether that's mild or severe disability. You can have short-term, long-term, it just depends. So yeah, half have some type of leave of absence of work due to injury. And you got to know how to navigate that. This is, unfortunately, this is how you're going to be providing. And I know I'm probably talking to the choir. I know you guys understand this, but I bet you some of you are hearing this for the first time thinking, wow, that's probably a lot higher than I was expecting. I wasn't expecting it to have that high of a chance. The last one I was going to leave with was most retire before the age of 60 in these kinds of industries. just because their body couldn't make it this long.
And especially if you're from maybe 40s below, you might not be aware, but some of the science and medicine, as the years go on, because of the advancement of technology and AI, there's the lifelong expectancy rate has actually decreased, but based on certain tools that will come, that should definitely pick back up. So if you take really good care of your body, like even at the age of 60, like you still have another, for a lot of people, 40 years left. Like you still have almost half your life left. So we're going to get to other things at the end of other areas that you can work on to maybe progress from maybe even hobbies out to a career path during or even after you get out of this hard manual labor job. But just certain things to think about in terms of your mind, your body, of what you want to do after work. Because I know like we have a bunch of friends in construction and that are dealing with hard laborious jobs that the money's good, but like the money can only last for so long before your body starts breaking down.
For
and
sure.
You're gonna make some awesome friends along the way, which is so cool. But at the same time, like you have to take into consideration yourself and who you are and put yourself first in certain situations with that.
And just know that it's going to come no matter what you do to try and stop it 100%. You're not going to be able to prevent any wear and tear, but you will be able to prevent some and make it a little bit easier for you. Hopefully avoid surgery, hopefully still be able to maintain good activity after the age of 60, even longer. This is achievable. It's just knowing what to do long term, prevent before obviously it gets there. Yeah. The last thing I have here was up to 60% reported having back pain on the job, knee pain up to 30%, especially with kneeling or heavy lifting, shoulder pain up to 25%, especially with overhead tasks like you were talking about as far as painters, and then hand and wrist pain up to 20%. But like we talked about prior, up to 5 times higher for carpal tunnel surgery. And so, yeah, these things are important to understand, know what to expect. And we'll obviously get to this a little bit further in the podcast, but have a team ready. Have a team ready to help you. And don't be afraid to look around and find someone who is putting out information or who has worked with your industry before. And if they're there just to help you for that time, that's great. But you also need to understand that there are other places, especially clinics out there, who want more for you than to just help you at the time. We really want to make sure that you guys are able to continue to do what you love, especially if it comes to your job, and do it as long as possible, but also not have to sacrifice anything towards the end. Because you get to, let's say, unfortunately, you don't even hit 60. Let's say you're retired by 55. Like you were saying, we have a lot of life left. And if you are feeling like you can't even enjoy that, you're not even active anymore, and you're just in and out of surgeries and it's miserable, you're in pain, was that sacrifice worth it? I don't know. I wouldn't feel that would be. For others, maybe. But I know that there's a lot out there who don't want that, who they want to be able to have a life after their career.
Yeah. So Doc, when you said team, like I don't know if many people, I know you're in and I know where you're coming from, but what do you mean by team, and what are potential areas in which you can accrue a team?
For sure. And I think our teams look probably pretty similar as far as who we want on our health team. But for me, understanding first and foremost that if you are having body issues, you need a body doc. And historically, the 2 best body docs are going to be chiropractors or physical therapists. They understand what it takes to maintain a body long term. They understand how to help someone who is maybe in a more acute short term setting as well. And that's going to be something I would hope every one of you take advantage of. Have someone like that in your corner, because when the time comes, and more than likely it's going to come, that's what the statistics are showing. You got to have that person ready to help you get back to the job at hand without having to get yourself into maybe a worsening state where surgery and other more invasive forms of interventions are going to be needed, which is only going to make things harder. It is. You get a shoulder surgery, you'll only be able to put 30, 40, 50 pounds on that prosthetic. It does change you. So if you're used to lifting 150, 200 pounds, now that's something you got to think about.
Going through school, I'd never even realized that.
No,
Like graduate
right?
school. And I was in this field for a while, even before then. And just to see the compensations that can come from it, or not being able to do even work responsibilities, even having a shoulder or any type of surgery on it.
Yeah.
The implications of your body breaking down are going to have more of an effect than you probably ever will realize or ever think.
And it's tough for us to put that into perspective for you. It's tough for us to get you into that feeling. It's tough for us to fast forward what that feels like in 30 years. So the best I would do is try to find someone in the industry, maybe further down the line, and ask them just what it's like for them, and maybe things that they would have done different, or even just try to get yourself in some type of expectation and perspective change. I think that will make a lot of a difference too if you're newer into the industry.
Yeah, and if that doesn't sway you right there, like we've had people, especially these big, tough workers, break down, cry in front of us because they aren't able to lift their kids up or throw baseball.
And these are in their 30s.
Oh God,
these are young people.
Like and that's the part that we see on a daily, weekly basis, that we just want you all to pay attention to some of the implications that can come from repetitive, mundane work.
For sure. And then the only others that I would recommend would be other helpful pain intervention type specialists, whether that's acupuncture, massage, if you enjoy energy. I mean, there's a lot of helpful alternative specialists out there that are very good at what they do when it comes to managing pain. But obviously when it comes to, building and creating longevity, it's going to be chiros and PTs who understand how to do that biomechanically. Anyone else you would add to your team, Doc, that I missed?
The only one would be any type of like therapist, especially for mental health. I think it's incredibly important for the mind. And even if you guys feel like you're depressed, anxious, with that, the environment and the people you surround yourself with will sway and change mentally and who you personally are long term. So if you feel like you're not in the right setting, that might be a way that you have to either talk with your boss, or if you're a leader and a boss, to how you can change the culture. I think that's going to be important. But just to talk to someone maybe outside of work, outside of family, that will have a better understanding of certain situations. And it might sound weird or something that you just don't feel comfortable with, but it doesn't matter if you are the toughest guy or a hard-nosed, awesome, like female, like it doesn't matter who you are. We all go through tough times, but we have to have someone there to support us. I think that would be a part that,
for sure.
I mean, that's what it is.
I can't say enough about mental health and therapists when it comes to just it changed a lot of who I was for the better when I went to those kinds of specialists. And I think a lot of people, especially our age, are maybe getting into it more and more now. But for those of you, I know where you and I are from, up north, just even into this kind of industry where you are a tough son of a bitch to do these kinds of jobs. So opening up, more than likely probably isn't that kind of person. And maybe you are, but let's be real. I worked with a lot of those individuals, and I know who they are. And I know that it's hard for them because usually with the tough exterior comes the tough interior, not being able to wanting to share. And I get that too. I totally get that. I was that way. But like you said, it is needed, and many people, especially this industry, needs that. So just so you guys understand that. So Doc, with the mental mindset too, we can talk physical maintenance too, but when it comes to just prioritizing prevention of injury, obviously there's a lot of things that we can dive into, but first and foremost, prioritizing injury, I think a lot of people first just think about working out and what that should be for me, and that's about it. But there's so much more to prevention. Do you want to just share a little bit about just other than what we're going to be getting into as far as the nitty gritty of rehab, but what should others be thinking about before, just to add on to what we're going to be talking about soon?
Yeah, great question. And that's where when we look at this, there's going to be more tools as this podcast goes through. So if you need to, timestamps below and you just fast forward from there. But in terms of the maintenance and awareness of your body, the first thing is you have to be aware of certain situations that can come on. Because if you're mentally, your mind's on certain tasks or life in itself, you oftentimes negate and forget about certain small things that can come up, or a tweak here or there that, oh, it's fine, it got better. But anytime there's damage to the body, it leaves long-term lasting effects.
Yes.
So we're going to get into that, but that is something that you just got to pay attention. Now, when we look at how your body is feeling and performing, you can break this down to pretty much 3 different time frames. First off, how's your body performing like on an hour-to-hour basis, whether it's in the morning or with certain tasks? And then how's it doing on a daily basis?
Mm-hmm.
That might be before going into work or when leaving work. How is specifically your mind and body? How are they performing? Maybe some days on a tougher task or tougher job at work, or maybe you have to incorporate more either just meditation or just getting away from everything, doing something that you love, just mentally reset. And naturally we do these things, but I think to be aware of that is a whole thing in itself. And then the third one is on a weekly basis, whether you've had a strain of 3 to 4, 5 days, sometimes 6, for some people 7, that it's demanding on the body. That's where ideally you need to have that conversation with your boss or leader, or understand the barriers in which human bodies can go through for longer periods of time.
Mm.
And maybe if it's a tougher job and maybe your stature is not the best for that task, but you have to go through it just because of your job itself. That's where if you can incorporate others into helping you or switching up for the benefit of the team to get these tasks done, I think there's all very, very important implications with that. But again,
Drop the ego, right?
Absolutely.
Avoid the injury, you're going to drop the ego. A lot of people just want to do everything themselves or show off that they can lift this by themselves. Eventually that's going to catch up to you.
Yes.
And it just will come to a point where, yeah, it was fun to be able to show off to your buddies at the job site the kind of strength you maybe have, but it's not going to be fun not being able to get off your couch for days, maybe a week or so, feeling like you can't do anything because of the herniated disc that you gave yourself or something to that nature.
Yeah, and if you get crap from any one of your workers, which I know we've gotten enough times to where they're probably going through stuff just as bad as you are, and that's where can you separate yourself from others and put yourself first, if we will.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
That's where, like Doc said, like you gotta ego aside. Long term, if those people are still around, obviously it's tough mentally, but another couple areas that we want to address, or the need for addressing with long, laborious hours of work, is hydration and electrolytes.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not drinking enough water, if you don't have a canteen or something that you're bringing to work, I think that's hydration. And just water is one thing, but to make sure that you have electrolytes, whether that's just even salt or minerals, that's for most people will have effects on the headaches.
Especially in Arizona, you're going to be sweating it out.
God.
So water is only going to do so much.
Yep.
When it comes to rehydrating. You can drink as much water as you want, but if you don't replenish those electrolytes, you're going to feel the effects. And what that it would feel like is the same feeling of dehydration. Even though you're drinking all that water, you just don't feel replenished. You're still fatigued. You're sore. Those kinds of things.
Yeah. Or chronic headaches too.
Yeah.
Like especially
for sure.
tension headaches, that is so commonly related. Even if it's lighter, laborious jobs like planting flowers and you're on your knees for longer periods of time, same thing applies for all this. And then other areas to address and be aware of is body systems, whether it's your cardiovascular, like blood flow. Does your hands and legs become cold, even like in warmer settings? Or do you have this numbness, tingling, and that your hands or feet and like distal extremities, like that could be a blood flow regulation. Whether it's you wheeze with certain small, easy tasks,
Yeah.
like that could be something to do with your Huns, like COPD symptoms can come from that. Because I know most people in these fields are going to be probably pretty strong, but those are the other small things that you might not pay attention to that your body can start breaking down and start sending signals that if these are new symptoms that you haven't had or that you start having that maybe you didn't have in like your late teens, early 20s, theoretically there could be something going on or starting to break down of your body moving forward. And then again, are you mentally sharp and present with each scenario? And that might come down to sleep, and definitely will come down to nutritional values, which we're going to get to here in a hot sec. But mentally, are you there or are you groggy? Is it their brain fog? There's a few ways that we can address that. But again, assess hydration, electrolytes, body systems, and then mentally, are you there
Right.
or not?
And that's tough if you're running off of caffeine and you are not getting good sleep, and more than likely you're using other substances to help you get by. There's just going to be more of a chance of you getting injured because of either not cognitively aware, you're not fully replenished after sleeping, and if obviously you're working 6-7 days a week and you're not giving yourself any proper time to recover, you're only going to be pulling to use more of those types of substances and help you get by too. There's more to that than just what Doc said. And there is a lot more to that. And I think it takes a lot of self-awareness to look at that and say, okay, I need to do better, especially if you're younger, especially if your peers are doing the same thing, if they are just not doing anything for themselves to try and repair and recover. It's easy to fall trap to, I guess, that system around you because that's maybe your support system right now. Maybe that is all you have is just your friends at work. But I think those of you that are listening that maybe are experiencing this know what you need to do, what is going to be better for you long term, and you got to wake up and realize that before it gets too bad.
Yeah, and we understand it's hard to break the system.
Oh,
it's
for sure.
really hard to go against your support system. I know we've had to do it. It's not easy. There's others that will get hurt, even really good friends that you feel like they're on your team, but if you don't address that it's not either mentally or physically good for you, it's either you have to have those conversations and they suck, but it'll feel better as you get those conversations out of the way, or just eliminate yourself from certain settings, whether it's, and I don't like to say this, but it is what it is, either switching jobs or changing, I guess, where you work, who you work with, for the betterment of yourself long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So Doc, I know you brought up listening to your body, making sure that if damage is being done, you can address that. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on that?
Yeah. So when we think about continuous repetitive laborious jobs over and over again for the similar tasks, pay attention to the soreness of your body, because if the soreness prolongs as you go from day in to day out, more times than not, the tissues are going to start breaking down, and then injury is going to come from there. So if you are more sore than typical, take more rest days, do something that will help aid in the health and recovery of your body outside of work, whether it's weekends, whether that's after work, or even if available before work. That's something that if you overtrain certain tissues, if the tissues or your muscles are sore for days on end, it's going to lead to injury. Then, like we said, surgery, hopefully not, but that will inevitably be effect for most people. And then it's just compensations and long-term deterioration in your body.
Right. Yeah. And I even like to think of it as there's insults and then there's injury. And insults, usually you can get past them. It's almost as if, I'll take, let's say, the shoulder, for example. Let's say you go to lift that 80-pound, 100-pound item, maybe even less, and you feel anywhere from maybe a 2 to 4 out of 10 pain, soreness in a part of the shoulder, and you're like, yeah, just maybe lifted wrong or whatever. And let's say, another week later, You do it again, and you're like, oh, maybe that got a little bit more. You're like,
Mhm.
everything else I can do fine. I'm not too worried about it. Those are insults, and they're telling you something. They're telling you either A, the tissue is not ready to handle whatever you're doing, or what you're doing is, as far as form or as far as just how you're lifting, is not right. It could be either of those, and it could be something else too that I'm not thinking about, Doc. But those would be the first two couple things that would come to mind. And then, of course, it's going to be that time that you lift something, and that's where you get the tear. That's where you get the injury, and now you're effed for either a couple weeks, months, and the signs were there more than likely. Very rarely does someone just go full on tear out of nowhere. And if you just were not self-aware enough to catch the signs, then that's back to Doc's body awareness and just understanding how to listen to yourself. Pay attention. Trust me, you wouldn't have missed it. It was there. Either we're just too proud to think about it, not wanting help, or you're just a tough son of a bitch. I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't know what it is, but the signs were there, and you should have been listening to your body, because a lot of those are preventable.
If you have to rewind, that is such an important thing. And even if it's not on the job, or you tweaked it on the job, maybe it was a car accident, maybe it was playing softball and you threw your shoulder out, but you still do lifting laborious jobs for your hands, and moving material, what have you. The insult could happen in many different areas of your life.
Yep.
But like Doc said, if you feel it once, it gets better. Pain's the last thing to present itself. The body naturally will either diminish the pain threshold, and there's still going to be damage to that area. Unless you continue the maintenance on any past injuries, it's going to be incredibly important long term. But
Yep.
really love that.
And like we said, we're going to be coming up here shortly on talking about what that truly looks like as far as putting in the hard work to maintain. But even before that, Doc, what are some just great ways to warm up before work, especially if you're going to be preparing for obviously a long shift of labor?
Yeah, so you have to take in consideration, or have some sort of an understanding before you start that task, before you just roll out of the car, or walk into your station. What body areas are you going to be utilizing? Maybe it's the entire body, but what is the most common joint that you're going to be utilizing? Now, the joints are going to be one of the most important factors for most areas of body maintenance. And the reason I say that is we have to look in consideration of how the nervous system is attacking itself to the body, and then how's that communication from the body back to the brain. So when we look at the maintenance of your muscles, the muscles have a delayed effect of how they communicate back to the brain, and how the brain communicates back to the muscles. So when those muscles, tissues overlying any type of area are damaged, that automatically will either lead to soreness, dull, achy, sore, sometimes sharp discomfort. But when you look at the joints for a specific circumstance here, the joints have the signal to the spinal cord, brain with no delay, to where the muscles have a signal from muscle to the spine, slight delay at an interneuron, and then kicks back to the brain. So if there's any problem with any joint or any deep structure, it's going to cause overlying muscle tightness. So if you have chronic lower back tightness, if you have a restriction to where maybe are you able to put your hand behind your back, like all the way up? If you're not able to do certain small things, and if you have chronic tightness, there's probably something going on with your joints. And with that, when we hear past surgical cases, all of that is based off of mainly on joints. Or it's going to be tears of the muscle tissues, but not as important as it is joints. So you want to maintain any type of joint especially repetitive work long term. And if you need to go back to the body series on any of the past podcasts, we go over, and we're going to go over a little bit today of repetitive work and how to train that joint specifically so you can get blood flow around the edges. And then neurologically wise, it's going to lead to less guarding, less tightness. So you're able to move more, less pain. There's certain tools that you're going to get today, but if you need to, go back to our body series on whether it's shoulder, hands, feet, knees, lower back. There's a lot of applicable tools that we have there as well. What is the most common joint that you utilize and perform your tasks and your duties, and how can you maintain that? And we're going to get into how you train the joints as well. But the next part I want you to pay attention to, warming up the joints with also what is the repetitive movement, repetitive task for your job for that day. And then this is a term that I want you guys to pay attention to, counteracting the supportive movements. Now, I guess, what do I mean by that? For example, if you are a construction worker or a paver on the side of the road and you're shoveling like cement, concrete over and over again, well, first off, are you doing it the same hand, top, bottom with the shovel? Maybe we'll switch it up and switch grips, switch hands. Are you twisting the same direction? Can you change your body's direction and do the complete opposite way? Like during the job, are you able to do the same job and duty, but have an effect equally both sides of your body, so one side doesn't break down and force compensations to the other?
I love that.
Thus, a higher incidence of injury
that.
from there. So, small things that you have to know what the job is. You have to understand what's the common movement, and then can you adapt that common movement to affect equally on both sides of the body, even not even from left, but even from potentially front to back. But that will depend on the job and task at hand.
For sure.
From there.
For sure.
Yeah.
Now, there are, to talk a little bit about what you're adding to what you're talking about, not only should these individuals think about changing adaptation-wise to make sure it's symmetrical and they're obviously not favoring one side, worrying about wearing and tearing, but also just taking slight times during the day to work those areas that maybe they just exhibited force onto. You know, we talk about here taking micro breaks, but we've talked about that in a lot of other series too, where when you have just a little bit of time, we just talked about that with the office worker, just what you can do in a very small amount of time, 1 to 3 minutes. And I know that you have that amount of time when you're on the job too, because there are times to take these micro breaks. So Doc, when they are, what are things that they should be thinking about doing when they have that small bit of time to really focus on their body and get the best out of?
Yeah, I always looked at these as break checks. Coworkers, break check. There's a few areas, depends on the job, but for most commonality, lawn laborers jobs, water intake, break check, water intake. What's your core body temp? Are you working outside? Are you running hot? Are you starting to feel fatigued? If so, can you alter the temperature of your core body to do more work? And I just want to touch on this. I know we've touched on this previously, but let's say you're in the Arizona hot heat, hot weather. There's mainly only 3, potentially 4 areas in your body that you can either decrease or increase your core body temperature, because there's a different type of glomerulus cell that's involved with that on the skin level. So to change your core body temperature from being either too hot or you're overtraining, whether it's your sports outside in the hot heat or working on the hot heat, putting running, ideally cool, not ice cold water over your hands, your forehead, not your neck, bottom of the feet, and or armpits. Now, with those areas, as you hold or have running water or putting your hands up against a water bottle for a period of time, ideally you need a convection state. So ideally you would want cool running water over any of those areas, but whether it's a towel or a cool towel of your forehead or over your hands, either or would work. But you need about 2 to 5 minutes. You're going to start noticing more energy, but it diminishes the core body temperature. Now, the similar factor is true if you're in a cold environment. You're working on the side of the road, it's a blizzard out. Obviously, layers are going to be important. And the first areas of blood flow loss are going to be either your fingertips or your toes, just distal extremities, because the body temperature wants to suck the core warmth of your body more inwards. to protect the vital organs, if we will. So that's where either mittens or heat packs that you can break off, either put in your shoes, feet. We use it outdoor hockey skating all the time, or whether it's like warm mitts in your hands. Obviously, if you're living up north, this is common sense to a lot of this, but not many people understand that in a hotter weather that you can diminish your core body temp. Now, the reason I did not say put a cool towel or ice over your neck, because the area there, if you are in a hot environment, your body is naturally going to overheat. Now, with certain receptors in your neck on the skin level, if you put cold towel or cold ice pack there, the body is going to think, okay, this is very, very cold, and we want to increase the core body temperature, which will exacerbate the symptoms from there. So that's
I didn't know that.
I said like the four
That's
areas:
interesting.
palms, forehead, feet, armpits. Yeah.
And I hope that changes just how you're going about cooling down out there, because those are simple switches I think a lot of people can do to try to. And it gets hot here. My gosh, man. I can't imagine working outside. Working up north in the humidity was hot, but this is all year round, and oh my gosh, it gets hot here. So I think that is something that could definitely help those watching.
Yeah, so break checks, water intake, core body temp, and then mind and body, and just do the assessment there, aches, pains, whatnot with that.
For sure.
Yeah, so Doc, if injuries happen, obviously you want to be able to heal yourself to full ability. I guess what areas or what ways would you think about in terms of if an injury does happen, and then I guess how would you better prepare for injury, and where would you go if something does take place?
I think preparing for injury, number one, is going to be making sure you have your team, you're prepared, doing what we're telling you, which is making sure to maintain the body, be cognizant during your break times, stretching before work, doing those types of workspaces that we talk about. When you're young, you can get away with it. And that's where I'm probably resonating more with the older industry workers that have been in the industry maybe 5-10 years, because they are already agreeing with what we're saying because they're feeling it. And if they didn't take care of themselves, then they understand. But when you're young, you can get away with it. And so you need to, even though it may not feel yet you're breaking down or you have issues, I mean, that's great. We don't want you to have them. So you got to not take for granted what you have, and please continue to prevent anything further from happening, because you are just at such a risk of injury and of wear and tear. And this is how you're going to prevent that, plain and simple. So unfortunately, if injury does happen, you need to give it the necessary amount of time to heal. Otherwise, you're going to have to deal with that the rest of your career. And I remember when I worked in a butcher shop and I was lifting like a 100 pound basket of sausages, and I believe I tore my rhomboid or some tissue between my shoulder blades, because knowing what I know about the body, being a doc, I know that's more than likely what happened. So I was in bed for 3 days. I could not move. It hurt so darn bad. I was young. I didn't have money, so I felt like I couldn't, do anything with it. But if you have a job and you have insurance and you have all that stuff, there are plenty of ways you can get help and going asking for help. I just didn't, and that was my own fault. So I dealt with that and still deal with it. And it wasn't until I gave it the necessary time to heal, which was working out multiple times a week. I mean, when I was working out 6 times a week and doing that for, I think, 6 to 8 months, finally, I started to feel like myself again, where I could do a lot more extensive work without pain. And I still now to this day really don't deal with that anymore, because I put so much effort and work into that. And I overcame just the tissue that was laid down as far as crappy fibrotic, just not healthy tissue when you get into that injury. And those are that's sometimes maybe the kind of effort that it is needed to really heal something like that. So for those of you out there who either have been injured or obviously know that's something that you might have to deal with, you got to give it the appropriate time. And for those of you that have had an issue, the pain went away in a week or two, and you're ready to go again. You talked about this too. Pain and function are two different things. Even though the pain went away, you now need to understand that that damage was still done. Still give it the time appropriate and still continue to work on this. But yeah, just make sure that you give it the appropriate respect and know that these kinds of injuries can stop you from a longer career if you didn't give them the time they deserved right away.
Absolutely.
So, Doc, anything with that?
Yeah, and when you look at the maintenance of your body long term with some of these common injuries that you may have or experience, we know now in the literature that if you create damage to any part of the body, it's going to leave long-lasting effects long term for years on end, potentially decades. Like, yes, cells do turn over throughout the body, like majority do. However, when you look at the maintenance with that, there's other therapies are coming more to fruition. So you might have to look at some of our past episodes on regenerative medicine. I cannot say specific words just due to limitations of social media and YouTube and whatnot with that. If you need, there's other resources available, more cash services, but they will also accelerate the healing significantly.
Right.
Dr. Addy is an awesome resource there on all areas to quickly accelerate the body via those areas. But again, if you have questions, past episodes, anything with regenerative medicine, that is where I'd go from there for those concerns. But yes, like when you look at for injuries, it's going to be necessary and maintenance for the body long term, whether you're in pain or whether you're not.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, not to have pain at all ever is going to have that effort put in on a consistent basis for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But Doc, let's dive into some strength, mobility. Let's say we're feeling good. Maybe we're not necessarily 100% injured, but we have some slight aches, tweaks. I guess let's dive into 5 ways that you can commit towards your strength and mobility for the long-term purpose of your body.
For sure. And I think this is where we're gonna try to give as much as we can when it comes to the meat of this. But if you're looking for a full workout program, that's where I think the body series would be helpful. Mm-hmm. And just taking really what we're going to talk about today is going to be more just the minimum of what you need to do. Mm-hmm. And if that even sounds like a lot to you, then you got a long ways to go to build yourself up to this point, because this really isn't that much. And so we really are just trying to help you get at least the minimum out of where you can go. And you'd be surprised at what this little amount of work can do long term for someone, as long as they're continuing to be consistent about it and stay disciplined. So if you're even looking for something more than this, great, awesome. We do have some other podcasts we've done for that. And I'm sure there's a lot other strength programs online that you can look up. If you have any questions, obviously just let us know. But right away, just strength training to protect your body a couple times a week, maybe a few times a week. You got to focus on all the areas of the body that you more than likely will be putting more force onto. So if it's heavy lifting, arms and back, especially the legs too, to help with that. If you find that you are working more and it's causing issues with maybe your knee or your wrist or your ankles, those are where workspaces can come in. But before I get too much into it, joint training really, and Doc has talked a lot about that too. So you can go back and look at just what joint training looks like. That's really where you're going to be able to build up those parts of the body. Doc, anything on strength?
No, that's beautiful. And there's a few other areas we're going to get to with rest and recovery as well. But when you go into strength training, like let's say you put a hard day's work, you're doing a lot of work with your arms, you have to be smart on when to incorporate also some of the strength training. So if you have a couple days off, a weekend, maybe either that Friday to allow a couple days to recover going into the next week, you have to pay attention not to overdo and overuse some of the muscles in some of the areas, because that will also lead to the body. So you're going to be up against the clock for majority of this to rebuild your system and to create this change that you want long term. And it sucks when you first start. You almost have to put more work in. And then as you start feeling better, start moving better, increase the range of motion, less pain, soreness, discomfort, then you can back off on certain other areas
Yeah.
with that. But yeah, that's just one thing that obviously pay attention to a couple times a week. But when Doc was bringing up joint training, joints are the most underutilized area in terms of what you can train. And not many people even understand how to either train the joints. So if you don't give certain blood flow to the edges of the joints, the body's not going to send resources to maintain your fullest range of motion. The body's just going to utilize what your common tendencies are, your common movements, and then it's going to restrict everything from there. So if you may have noticed, as you matured and go from early teens, 20s, to where you can go through a lot of stuff and your body recovered really quickly. Now maybe you're becoming incredibly tight throughout your body. You're not recovering as well. Maybe you're not sleeping very good. You're sore like every single day. That's where and why we would go into some of the joint training. Specifically, there's other areas that you'd want to probably obviously look into, but that's definitely the reason why.
Yeah, for sure. Next up, we have stretch daily, which stretch in our terms is a lot different than what people think of stretching. So when we say stretch, we mean dynamic stretching.
Love it.
We mean, we call them workspaces. They're also called cars, right?
Yeah.
Controlled articular rotations, right? And what we mean by that is dynamic, meaning we don't think of stretching as take tissue into a point and hold it, right? We need you to be moving during this time of stretching. And we've hit every workspace of the body in our body series. As far as just one to show you right now would be the shoulder, where you're going to go through the fullest range of motion possible. This is where thumb goes all the way up to the top, turn, and then go all the way through. I've been working obviously a lot on that with my shoulder, and just continuing to do that should be about 5 to 10 minutes through every part of the body that you're going to be working that day. You'd be surprised at how much more effective that is than your typical static stretch routine. And they might, I know a lot of job sites now actually incorporate stretching prior to working on the job, but I'm okay always just being the weird one out. That's just kind of what I've been like. So if what they have for you, their HR department gave you this stretching routine where it's all static, go ahead and think about maybe just doing something on your own and just go about and do your own thing, because right now we're telling you that's not the way to stretch. So anything with...
Yeah. The more you can move your body pain-free, the better it's going to function long-term. Blood flow, nervous system communication back and forth. However, if you are restricted, if you have to go into certain stretches, maybe it does feel good, but that's awesome. If you passively just hold an area and feel stretch, let's say for tricep or across your shoulder, or even for your glutes, sitting and putting pressure down, stretching just itself at length will have a good effect, but it has to be done at a minimum of 2-minute holds per day in order to create change, or the tissues, muscles are going to just relax back to what they're used to. So when you also go into a stretch, if you apply a muscle contraction as you're stretching, it's going to allow your nervous system to communicate to that muscle tissue at length, so you can better go and utilize that back there. That's another interesting point also, where if you, let's say if you're strength training or if you're going through repetitive movements over and over again, oftentimes anytime you move a joint from lengthen to short, especially for this example, bicep, if you're not watching, anytime I bring it length to short, we're working more muscles. Now, anytime we're either at length, like where the whole muscle belly is extended, or if you're completely short or completely flexed, that is bleeding the energy of your body into the ligaments and tendons. So if you do repetitive work on your muscles, they will overpower and cause either tendinitis, tendinosis, or damage to ligaments and tendons, which can lead to tears long term. So what also Doc was referring to with some way of training joints, mobility, but also if you have to go into stretches, positional holds, try to force a muscle contraction of the muscle you are stretching. Try to squeeze that muscle, contract that muscle, either into the stretch or away from the stretch. So it activates both areas on the opposite side of either the joint or the body. So that'll look like you're stretching the muscle and you apply a muscle contraction, 5 to 10 seconds. Lightly, it doesn't have to be intense. You have to vary the intensity. But if you incorporate that into your daily stretching, it'll create change long term, which will also help for less injury risk as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Doc, now there's a lot of different types of movements that individuals are doing on the job. Some of it is maybe slower, repetitive. Some of it is maybe faster, repetitive. So is there a way that they can train for that too?
Very inquisitive view. So when you look at the speed in which you perform tasks, whether that's you're shoveling, maybe it's slow, or if you like have a jackhammer and it's this quick vibrational movements, the speed in which either you hold or perform a task matters. So, for example, what I mean by that is your muscles and tissues, if you're not used to the speed or the repetitive movement and how fast or how slow that is, that can be trained outside of work. Whether it's if you need to train a vibrational sense, whether it's like I said, holding a jackhammer or either holding any type of machine
Sander,
sander,
yeah,
really good
all
point.
those, yeah.
You have to pay attention to your body can only withstand so much vibrational sense before the neurons either in the hands or feet or just the body become overwhelmed, and then it diminishes and decreases the signal to the brain. There can be a blood flow numbing component to that as well. So it breaks, obviously, if you're in this line of work, you're going to be very aware of certain symptoms like that. But let's say, for example, the job is pressing you, or you have to meet a deadline and you have to work maybe a little bit faster, a little harder on the same repetitive movement. Whatever movement that is, ideally trying to recognize that either days, weeks before, or understand that eventually this will happen and occur. And then whatever movement that is, try to train outside of work, either with free weights or no weights itself, to go into either, for example, shoveling slow versus shoveling fast. And then, like we said previously, switch up both sides. So switch up the hand placement. So the speed of which you apply any rehab, any training will also subsequently will help for on-job purposes for whatever you need, just to also prevent injury. Because if you are not familiar with a speed of a movement or any different types of movement, it will increase the risk for injury.
Yeah.
There.
And even just as far as shoveling goes, just so that maybe you have an example, would be taking and leaning to grab a medicine ball and then throwing it back up against a wall. So that trains resistance at the end of the range of motion. It adds some ballistic component to it. And then obviously the, flinging of whatever you're shoveling a certain way is you throwing that medicine ball back at the wall, and then train both sides like you talked about. That could be something you start thinking about. If you really do need help on how to train for certain movements, please let us know in the comments. We'd love to make up some exercises for you. It's what we do every day and we really enjoy it. So please send us all of your movements that you do during the day, and we'd be more than happy to give you some exercises. Balanced posture at work. I think there's a lot of misconception about posture too, and I think we can break that down a little bit, but making sure, if you are, the easiest ones are going to be not bending and not using appropriate leg strength to lift. I mean, these are all things that I think most of us would think about when it comes to posture, especially on the work site. But there might be some other things too that you aren't thinking about. And so, Doc, for mine, it's going to be if you have some downtime and you're just leaning up against things to pass the time versus maybe just walking around the job site. That would be one where you think about that. You possibly have a certain side you like to lean on, and that is going to be for 5 years. Eventually that adds up in that compensation pattern. We will see that. We address that with the body. So making sure even just little things like that, where are you leaning to one side versus the other, even just routine pickup work. Well, let's say you guys are cleaning up after a job and you just have a tendency to lean and pick up with one hand only, or it's just simple things like that where you may not think it makes a difference, but posturally it does. I guess foundationally, it's just symmetric is always going to be something to think about. And anytime you can add movement that is pain-free, it's going to be way more helpful than just sitting for long periods or standing for long periods without any movement. Doc, anything with that?
No, you hit that perfectly. And obviously, we all have to pay attention to gravity placed on ourselves throughout any day, throughout any time of our life. And it's fascinating enough, I shared something with Doc that I actually just learned myself, that gravity and the pressure on your body will change where you're at based on the earth. If you're closer to the equator, you have less body density or less gravity placed upon you. A lot of it is based on how the earth is spinning and how far away the distance of the diameter of which it spins versus middle of the earth versus closer to like the poles where it can spin slower. So the closer you are to the poles of the earth, so either way up north or way down south, will have more gravity putting pressure on your body, thus will have more breakdown. So when we see either snowbirds moving from up north to warmer weathers, obviously the warmer weather will help for arthritis and joint movement, but also factoring in now, moving to warmer weather close to the equator will also have less pressure against gravity on your body. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Which never would have thought about.
Same. And then Doc, last and the absolute most important way to commit for strength, mobility, and just the long-term stature of your body, rest and recovery.
Yeah.
Doc, what's your 2 cents on that?
This could be a podcast in itself. I'm going to try to hit the main points here for those listening. You're already going to be working a manual labor job. You're already going to be putting strain and effort onto your joints. So when it comes to rest and recovery, try to do those kinds of activities that don't require or put strain onto the body. So swimming, there's very little force put onto the joint when we're swimming. It could be, so that's even training too. We didn't really hit on that, but I think that's important too, which is feel free to use those kinds of activities that don't require heavy lifting, like you're already going to be doing during the day too. Just something to think about. But when it comes to rest and recovery, making sure that you are prioritizing sleep, I mean, that's going to be number one. Body work, massage, chiropractic, if not weekly, once a month is the absolute bare minimum, but I don't even like saying that.
Pushing it.
It is. It really is. So maintenance for us, for someone like yourselves who are working that hard, it's tough at once a month. You might have to push it to more frequently. And if we're looking ideally and you are really interested, once a week, once we've gotten to a point of maintenance, right? They might be in a state where you're going to need frequent visits until you're back to 100%. But if you are at 100% and you're just looking to maintain, once a week is beautiful and it's a great investment for yourself. Massage, and then just even the other fun stuff, which I think even for managing, like let's say in the heat, we can use this for the cold too, but for the heat, doing like hot yoga, where you're pushing yourself above a certain temperature and a humidity that maybe you're not used to. It's great for the body, going to warm up, stretch, maintain mobility.
Build the tolerance.
But your tolerance to heat is so much better. When I first moved down here, I did a lot of hot yoga, and it made this heat so much more tolerant for me. Seriously, it wasn't as nowhere near as difficult for me. And I can assure you that's the same up north, where cold plunges and getting yourself even colder than what you're expecting, then that alone, you're able to at least tolerate that kind of climate too. But yeah, and both of those are just great for the body themselves, but obviously they have different effects too. Yeah, I'm just hitting the main ones, but Doc, anything with those?
No, I absolutely love. Build up the tolerance, whether it's cold, heat, obviously be safe about it. And then, really good point about the pool, because anytime you're in a pool, you have less pressure on joints. There's less gravitational force on the body itself. By all means, start a swimming routine maybe once a week, couple times a week. Hugely beneficial for the recovery of your body. And then obviously enough sleep at night. And I know a lot of people that work either construction or just even long laborious jobs, alcohol is going to be a whole thing in itself, which if you do that on a consistent basis and maybe you feel like you're sleeping better because you're drunk, there's different ways to think about this, but necessarily you're not necessarily sleeping better. You're compensating from that aspect. And
we know we lose REM sleep when we drink.
Mhm.
We don't get to the deepest stages of sleep. We maybe fall asleep quicker and maybe sleep longer, but the quality of sleep is less. So there is a trade-off and a sacrifice. Just something to think about too.
Perfect. Of that. Absolutely. Yes. Exactly what Dr.
Mhm.
Addy said. And then if you need to, obviously, plan out more rest days or invest in a good mattress is also incredibly
Yeah, good
important
point there.
as well too. Yeah, those are. Doc, is there anything?
No, that's great.
Cool.
Lastly, we have just what kind of daily priorities can you start thinking about when it comes to your health in general, but also towards this industry too. I know, Doc, we've talked about hydrating regularly.
Mhm.
That one is we bring it up again because of just how crucial it is. You guys are expending a lot more energy than most. You're probably sweating a lot more than most. So it's more meaningful for you guys to think about that. Next for me is going to be getting enough protein. Now, I put down 100 grams per day minimum, but even for those out there that are working, a lot harder, and even if you have a gym routine outside of your, manual labor job, now that raises it, because we only are able to repair the tissues per the amount of protein that we intake, and that's going to be the main source. So for, let's say, 150-pound male, it should be a 1-to-1 ratio. So that'll be about 150 grams of protein. Now, for a 200-pound individual, you could get to 200. That's a hefty amount of protein. But obviously, if like a 300-pound individual, 300 grams of protein, that's just absurd. So it starts to change, obviously, with a higher weight. But once you're past 200 pounds, it could be about 0.8 per one. You can maybe start using it as a ratio. But 100 grams is just the bare minimum. And that would be like 3 chicken breasts. So to think about how much you need to eat to maintain. And a good source or a good story I have is I was working with a lineman and someone who works on the power lines. And he started dieting. And he started having back pain. And I started working with him. After a couple of weeks, we weren't seeing the change. He was a young gentleman. And I'm like, this isn't right. You should be responding. This is usually very effective, at what we do, and I just don't understand why you're not getting better. And so I started asking more questions. I said, "What did you start doing 2 weeks ago?" And he's like, "Oh, I went on a diet." And I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting. What are you eating?" And he's usually just 1 egg for breakfast, and then a light lunch, maybe like a salad, and then I've usually just been having a couple beers at night, and maybe a meal here. But so I started thinking, I'm like, "Gosh, you're not eating anything, man, compared to what you were." And I said, that needs to change. I don't care if you're trying to lose weight. You don't have you don't have the ability to do that. Your diet needs to be so much different than what your typical weight loss diet should look like, because you need to maintain protein. So we changed everything. His pain went away within a few days. Yeah. So does it make a difference? Absolutely, it makes a difference.
Yeah, you got to supply the body with what demands placed on your body throughout not only daily, but weekly, monthly, yearly.
Yeah,
absolutely.
for sure.
I love that. And even obviously you want good protein sources. You can diminish the amount of processed foods or processed meats. Ideally, will have a better effect on your body. Supplements, protein powder will help to a certain extent, but a lot of supplements are not necessarily regulated by the FDA. So what they say are in the bottle, oftentimes for majority of companies, are not necessarily completely true for everyone.
No.
So pay attention.
So find
to
good
that.
sources. If you want to know which sources to look for, let us know. We can obviously give you each our favorites. Some supplements that you could think about taking. There's so many, so I'm not going to go too far into it. But fish oils is great for joint health. You can take certain joint supplements. I'm sure if you just Google it, they'll pop up. But glucosamine, alpha lipoic acid, L-carnitine for muscle change. More, extensive protein and creatine are probably 2 of the more important ones to focus on.
Yeah, I would say for sure. And you guys might feel weird about this. Creatine, more for the mental, psychological component. There's so many studies out there. And a majority of people think, oh, I'll put on water weight. Our body's made up of mostly water anyways. It just helps with all the neurological functions as well too.
It's not as much as you think. It really isn't.
Yeah.
I would say if you eat enough protein and put some creatine in, maybe some fish oils, you're doing 80%. I mean, you're close. If you're really truly broken down and you're sore every day, you're not missing a supplement. That's not where you need to start working. You got a lot more work to do than just taking an extra supplement. So don't get lost in that kind of minutia. Doc, you brought up processed foods. I liked what you talked about when it comes to prep, though. Do you want to dive into that?
Yeah, and I'll have you take on some of this because I know you do way more prep than I do. But I know for majority, especially friends and people I've noticed, construction workers specifically, or anyone that's worked long hours on tough work, the time can be skewed and time can be very limited. So that's where gas station stops for either food, snacks will be common. And that's what we highly suggest to go away from. This is going to be a very tough habit to break, and you're going to probably have to pay attention to yourself going to gas stations and having that urge to either buy a soda or buy one of those sandwiches. Or it's weird to say, even some of the fruit that they have there is not the best quality either, but I mean, it's better than a lot of this other processed foods. Like anything that you find in wrappers or packaged is processed, and that will lead to less performance on your body. Much like Doc said, is with the protein intake and having some of these other basic nutritional values in your whole system will subsequently help how all the cells in your body function. It'll help with brain fog, it'll help with fatigue. There's just so much there that I would almost suggest this would be a top priority or top 5 priorities of anything we talk about in today's episode to get away from. Whether it's prepping meals and food at home, having a lunch box, do you have a microwave at work? Can you utilize that? Docs, what are some of the ways that works for you in terms of prepping meals for the week?
Yeah, and it's going to be different for everybody. I know that it might even be a little different for the industry worker just because you might need to prep breakfast and maybe a lunch as well. And then maybe you can get by with, making supper at home or something like that. But what works for me is one day of the week, prepping for most of the week. That's a great way to time management. So that way you're not having to continuously cook and then it's ready to go. So that way I know what it's like when long hours and you're just looking for something quick. The first thing you're going to grab, your body is going to want you to grab crappy processed food carbs. It knows what to expect. It's weird how there's even studies that show the bacteria in your stomach actually can hijack your brain and put out signals to give you crappy short energy carbs. It's super fascinating once you look into that. If you can prep for that, I know that they make like heatable lunch pail packs now where you can, over the course of the day, keep your food warm. And then obviously once it's ready to consume, it's ready to go there. And I know that there's other technology that you guys can, take advantage of. It's just a matter of prep and being willing to take some time in your week to prep for that. But it's going to make a world of difference. It's probably going to save you some money too. I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, that was super, super important. If there's any habit to break, it would be gas station foods, snacks for a majority of you guys. And if you guys want, on our first episode, we went into habits and goals and different ways that you can break down habits or build up habits in terms of chaining. I know we touched on that last episode as well too. By all means, go to episode 1 on that one for any questions there, and it's time stamped as well. But yeah, now Doc, obviously we brought up schedule regular body visits, having the proper team. I know that's obviously an important factor. The one thing I did want to bring up would be sunglasses. And I see this not even people in hard manual labor, but even just people walking in the morning just with sunglasses on. Sunglasses are awesome, especially for either midday or if there's a large intensity into your eyes. Now, ophthalmologists will obviously say if you have a condition of your eye and if you need sunglasses, that's important. I don't want to diminish that. Like, obviously listen to those physicians, those advices, if we will. But in terms of every single person, like, you want sun coming into your eyes either in the morning or as the sun sets, because that helps regulate all the other cells in your body through your circadian rhythm, which it's a fancy process that your eyes regulate where either the sun is in space and the colors outside, whether it's the sunrise or the sunset, those colors that you perceive just peripherally and subconsciously will have receptors in the eyes, which then communicates to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is a whole nerve bunch right above your mouth, which then supplies and communicates to all the other cells in your body, which helps regulate your whole system. So the importance of, if you are able to limit sunglasses in the morning or later in the afternoon, unless you need it, working at a job that you're squinting, you just can't do a certain task, then we totally understand there. But that will have a better overall effect of your system if you can limit it morning and night.
Right.
There. But yeah.
For sure. And then just knowing that this is going to take some time to change things. And so when we start to build habits, Doc and I have talked about habits a lot. There comes a time where, we always want to get to the end and maybe only have sight towards that. And it's tough to just be zoned in tunnel vision on the outcome versus maybe enjoying just the journey itself. And so give yourself some grace during this time. It might be a huge change for a lot of you. We explain it as simple changes, but we've also both have put in a lot of work on making certain changes. It's maybe coming from that perspective from us, and maybe a few of you guys are thinking, wow, this is a lot that I'm going to need to change in my day-to-day routine. And okay, I'm glad you guys are recognizing that. Don't be afraid to celebrate some of the small changes that you are making. Give yourself some grace, but continue to stay consistent. We know you're going to get to that end goal. Doc, anything with that?
No, that's beautiful. And yeah, obviously, if you have something you want to change or a small habit you want to add in, and just the fact that you did it for a day, did it for consistently for a week, that's huge. Like you're going against your mental processes and the mundane, every single, like your repetitive cycle of like how you live life. And the fact that you have to change that involves mental and physical effort way more than people realize. And yes, we're saying this stuff, and Doc said we've gone through it, but it's way more challenging than you will probably realize. Once you start trying to change, you're going to understand what we're talking about. But this is not something light. In order to create change, you're going to have to go against probably social group. You're going to have to go against your mind and like neural circuits.
Yep.
And just like mood. There's just so much there. Now, there's certain ways that you can celebrate those wins, whether it's go out and enjoy something with your friends, family, just even detaching yourself from the physical world and getting out of social media and just experience and get out to like the forest or anywhere that's just nature will also help you mentally reset and then come back to you. So once you do go back into the everyday world, especially for those that are in like a city environment, it's tough on the body. It's something it's constant stress, constant neural circuits that are firing on a consistent basis that it's hard to maintain for years on end.
It is.
Without breakdown.
It is. And a lot of those jobs too are relatively thankless because you're not usually, some of them you may get that, but a lot of the times you go in, you do your job when the person's not there or no one's there. It's just maybe construction for the row. Very rarely I feel like cars just pull over and thank a construction worker. I don't know. And so this is where you got to be there for yourself too, and just know that we do appreciate everything. I know from where I came from, pretty much all of the family members and the people that were around me, that's the kind of just job that they had. And we do appreciate that. But you guys also need to take that for yourselves, and don't be so tough on yourselves when you're going through this kind of change, and stay consistent. You will get there if you start putting the effort in. It doesn't take as much as it may hear or seem to you guys when listening to this podcast.
Yeah, consistency. That's staying with it day by day, even though it sometimes suck. Obviously, pay attention, be aware of your body and your systems. But yeah, it's important. It's important for a long-term aspect. So as we go into the long-term planning for your job moving forward, whether you've been at this line of work for 20 plus years or you're just starting off, I think there's certain areas that obviously you need to invest into your health, into your mind, into your body. And there's different ways that you can go about that for the maintenance of. I know there's resources that we've put together, and there's more resources that will come about with some of the stuff Doc's doing off to the side, and even for, I guess, myself in terms of resources and even courses coming to fruition with that. So stay tuned for that coming on down the road. Doc, is there anything you want to touch on there?
Yeah, no. And the investment is going to come a lot from the time alone that it takes to start making these changes. But if you do want some help investing in a team of docs, it's going to be the first that I would recommend. Next would be, if you want some help training, go hire a trainer. If you need some help creating some meal plans, I've found guys on TikTok that are talking about it, that you don't have to pay that much and they'll just send you a meal plan. There's definitely resources out there that don't break the bank. To be honest, if you Google healthy meal plans for the week, it doesn't take much to get this information now, which is great, because anytime you can save money, I'm all for that. So I work hard to make sure that I don't spend money on stupid stuff, at least that I don't have to. If you're going to try to make it to a certain age in this industry, what's that going to look like? Things that come to my mind would be, if you're going to be in that position of doing the manual labor for that longer period of time, maybe start thinking about, how can I eventually one day become maybe more of a project manager, foreman, where you start managing younger individuals who are, working. You've gotten to a point now where maybe you can promote yourself into the job, and that way that's usually comes with, it depends on maybe the company, but that usually comes with more of a management of driving around to each sites. Maybe you're not doing as much manual labor, and that might be a little bit better long term, getting yourself into a position where it's not as tough on your body, something to that nature. But getting to, obviously, retirement age now, that comes with other things that we could want to think about too, Doc. What should they be thinking about before that retirement starts to come into effect?
And when we first started off the podcast, it was people on average retire around age of 60 years old. And there's a lot of runway still left for most people. And whether it's you're currently in your job right now, it's tough, it's strenuous. Are there certain hobbies or interests that you find interesting, or are those hobbies or interests, can you turn that into a career? And if so, can you start that transition from either maybe when you completely retire, how to tackle a new hobby, or add in for pickleball is a huge thing for us now. But are you able to start either training or working on this small hobby or interest at your later years, so it's easier for the transition? Because I know for both of us, myself, in terms of college athletics, after that got done, it was almost like a drop off. And who am I? Who is my identity? And it's going to be the same thing if you've been at this work for 30, 40, 50, however many years. That's all. So then you add in something else, or you don't have anything at all, and then people just sit around for days on end, and then their body, mind breaks down. And that's where you have so much more to do, live, and experience. You have to have something that you can attach to, whether it's family, but ideally you have to have, in a perfect world, a purpose. So what is something that you enjoy? And try to start thinking about that in ways that you can explore that long term. And I'm not just talking about going and traveling and camping and just resting. Like, you mentally need to be engaged to keep your mind and brain racing to continue and moving forward. Like, we know now that there's studies longevity wise, if you have coordination of your hands long term, especially with tennis or pickleball, it helps for the cognitive processes later on in life. So it helps for living longer and functioning better longer. Whether it's woodworking, whether it's volunteering, like something that you can do outside of what you're currently doing, and start to think about that. Maybe, let's say, for example, you're planning long term and you're younger, you just start off in this hard laborious job. Maybe it's something that you necessarily maybe don't want to do the rest of your life. Can you perform that job and maybe after hours, weekends, work on whatever hobbies interesting? Can you turn that into a career to help with transition or diminish the time in your hard laborious job to move into something you actually love to do or
Mhm.
love to talk about. Like your happiness, we should absolutely put into the forefront. And I'm taking a huge page out of Gary Vaynerchuk's book. If you don't know, definitely check him out. He's an awesome individual. Happiness is something that we absolutely should put on the forefront with everything, because we're only here on this earth for so many years. And can we have an impact, and can we enjoy our time here? And that's where happiness matters.
Or it does.
Yeah.
It does. And you even talked about how some industries, they're out of their career by 40.
Mm.
So then what?
Exactly.
So that's where just have that mindset before you get to that point. The thinking about it before you get to that point is going to make a difference. Develop a progressive strength routine. Obviously, we've touched on that. Really optimally, we're shooting for, and if you could be doing something, whether that's small or moderate, every single day, that's always going to make a difference. But at a minimum, you need to take a good solid few days out of your week to put time and effort towards either cardiovascular health, your muscle health, joint health, and really practice all of the tools that we're talking to you guys about. That's a minimum. It's going to be a little bit more for even you guys listening because of just what you're going to be putting onto your body. That might actually even be a little bit more. Doc?
Yeah, and there's one important factor that most people, when we look at laborious jobs, tend to forget, and it's cardio work. It's how well your heart can pump blood from your body and how well your body can move that blood back to your heart, lungs, to bring oxygen to the body and then expel CO2 out from the lungs, out from the mouth, obviously from there. So cardio work, nutrition is going to be very, very important for most people, because like when you're working for long periods of time, there's a lot of energy spent. But much like Doc said, you have to build up the tolerance to the weather, but you also have to build up the tolerance to how your body and certain body systems function. So whether it's, even if it's one day doing a bout of cardio or a small jog, or a couple days, a few days a week going for a walk at the end of the day, just outside, just detaching yourself. All these are incredibly important for blood flow. And if you don't have blood flow, you're going to start having like neuropathy symptoms or just weird areas of like numbness, tingling that just randomly come about. It also, especially if you have like diabetes, or if you start eating poorly, type 2 diabetes, there's other symptoms that will start going downhill rather quickly at a later age, that if you can get on top of this and create habits, it's going to only benefit long term. So
For sure.
cardio work are super important. Yeah. Now, we want to touch on a few other things as we go through, and then we're going to get into some awesome tidbits at the end here. But in terms of your workstation, for people on their feet for longer periods of the day, footwear is going to be incredibly important. Doc, and I know you've looked and you talk to patients about this all the time. I guess, what's your 2 cents on shoes, orthotics, and anything along those lines?
In this job, it's going to be a little different because there's still going to be some portions of safety that come along with the footwear. If you have a need for a more durable, maybe steel toe shoe, unfortunately, that's just going to be a part of that. So that's only going to then add a little bit of more work to your prep during the week of maintaining the feet and making sure that you're taking good, healthy care of the feet too. So we'll get into that a little bit. But if you have a job where you're not wearing like maybe a heavier set type of shoe, the lighter the shoe, the better. It's going to make a huge difference on the gait cycle. It's also going to just make it a lot easier for you guys to ambulate and move through the job site.
Or how you walk and function.
Yeah. for those of more than likely we're going to be wearing a boot. Again, so I would keep weight into it. You always want to think about the lighter the better. If the sole itself is easily worn, then you want to make sure to replace those soles. There are plenty of companies that will just replace the sole for you. And if it is worn, to make note of that. You need to look at that and inspect your boots. These kinds of jobs, you're looking at anywhere from 6 months, the latest a year, before you replace footwear as well. Just because of how often you're going to be using this equipment. Most of the time, if you're not on your feet that often, you can get by with not replacing footwear that often. But with this one, it's going to be crucial. So making sure you're replacing them often, keeping them light. And then the last thing would be, if this boot alters the way you walk or stand in any certain way, whether it's a very, very large sole, can you get by with a less thick sole? And just knowing how it fits on the foot, making sure that if you are having a lot of feet pain with it, find something else, because you shouldn't be having that kind of thing as long as you're taking care of your feet, in the proper way. If you need to invest in orthotics, that is something you can do temporarily. We don't want you to become dependent on that. Coming up, we'll talk about how you can actually avoid orthotics. But if you need footwear to help temporarily, then yes, we can talk about that. But yeah, I think those would be the three for me. Doc, where do you stand on obviously the need for orthotics, and maybe then we can jump into things that they can do for their feet?
I love everything you said there. And even if you think, are orthotics, are they needed for you? You have to see, okay, do you have back pain? Do you have knee, ankle, foot pain? If so, then I would potentially look at that avenue for sure. But like in terms of, like Doc said, wearing the orthotics long term, you don't want to have your body rely, especially the small intrinsic muscles of your feet, rely on a support system. The body was made to walk, to move, to hunt, to gather, and a bunch of other areas with that. So as you're moving around, you can build up these structures, muscles, tissues, even if you have plantar fasciitis, even if you have bunion. There's a bunch of different ways that you can help train your feet. And just again, to 3 easy ways for applicable tools to work on if you do have orthotics, or if you do have feet pain or plantar fasciitis. There's a bunch of ways you can go about this, but the 3 awesome ways that I would suggest that you can start with for your feet specifically. I'm going to use my hand here for those of you that are just listening. I'll talk myself through this here, but when you look at your foot, you have to be able to grip the ground, so putting pressure of your toes into the surface, your heel into the surface, and connecting your toes and heels down and together, which helps create arch, especially on the inside. Now, to hold and maintain that arch, you want to hold a little bit of pressure and rock forward, backwards, side to side, just so you can allow absorption. Now, on top of that, I know Doc does an awesome job in terms of gait training or learning how to walk properly. If you have a significant other or someone at work, have them take a video of you, ideally barefoot, depending on the surface you are on. To a certain extent, you could probably watch them with their shoes. Take a video of them walking away from you and then towards you. Pay attention when your foot and heel hits the ground. Does your foot completely collapse inwards? And when you push your toe off, or as your back foot leaves the ground as you walk, are you more or less pushing off of your big toe? Or are you having your foot splay off to the side and you're pushing off of an area, kind of the inside portion of your foot?
Mm-hmm.
Those areas, if you can walk forward and just mentally trying to retrain yourself, that will help significantly there. It also help so you don't have the compensation on inside the foot. And orthotics help to a certain extent for the arch, so you're able to walk properly. But and how you can go about this other than the assessment tool, gripping the ground, leaning side to side, forward and backwards, connecting the nervous system to the feet. So if you guys are watching, if your thumb is your big toe, are you able to lift your big toe up off the ground and your outside 4 toes, putting pressure down to the ground? Awesome. Hold a few seconds. Are you able to put pressure of your big toe down into the ground and then your outside 4 toes up? And just even the fact that if you're not able to do, that's something that you can work on. It's just that tool itself. Okay, now adding in also the third way for most people, and this is generalized, it's not necessarily specific to you, but for most people this will work incredibly well for, is shins or muscles on the front of your lower leg. If you can strengthen that, it's going to help for bringing your toes up to your body, which will also help for, it's known as a windlass effect, but it helps more or less for efficiency of walking, if we will. So whether it's you holding up your toes to your body for longer periods of time, whether it's you're leaning forward and bring your knee over your toes and then trying to contract your shin muscles or the muscles on the front portion of your bottom leg as you're in that position, that'll also help significantly as well. So it's a mixture of those 3 to 4 things for the maintenance to build up to transition you from, if you have orthotics, to start working on these as you're wearing the orthotics, and then checking and assessing maybe a few weeks, month or 2 down the road, how you walk outside of your shoe, outside the orthotics. If it's becoming easier, maybe starting to take a day to transition on a lighter day or on a weekend and not having the orthotics in your soles, and see how you feel.
Yes.
Starting 1-2 days and then building up from there, and then eventually trying it maybe a lighter day at work and go from there. But
For sure.
Doc, anything
No,
on that?
I love that. That was great. And for any of you that have questions, please just let us know. We can always dive deeper into that. But those are 3 great ways, I think, to continue to maintain the feet. So next up, this is something that I know that Doc and I have talked to a lot of patients on. For those of you that wear a belt, and especially with things that are very heavy on your belt, those eventually are going to create compensations in the body. It's going to add extra strain, wear and tear to your joints. And if you add that up over years, over time, that's a lot of extra strain, unfortunate strain. You know, it is what you got to do with your job. But there are things I think Doc and we're trying to break down as far as how can you either get around that strain if you can, which would be, I know for the ease of things, sometimes you're just going to you just wear the belt all day because taking it on, putting it back on, taking it off is just too difficult, or it's just, cumbersome, which I understand. A lot of those belt systems are very intricate and come with a lot of things, which I get that. But the real question is, are you able to take that belt off any period of the day? And can you take it off more often than not? And if there is a time, can you get by without needing it? I guess those are just some things to think about, because that extra weight really does add to the body. And we're not saying not wear your belt. What we're saying is, can you get by, give yourself some time off of wearing it? There are some things that you can develop even with wearing a belt often. Is one of them is neuralgia paresthetica. That's just numbness on the side of your thigh, which we've had a lot of patients come in with. Truck drivers, especially cops who are sitting with that belt system and vest on in cars, can be very troublesome. I guess that's just where we're coming from as far as, can you adapt that portion of your workstation to give you any longevity long term? Doc, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I'd say
suspenders. There you go.
It'll probably look a little weird, but if you can even have the whole system that you have on your belt up through suspenders, if that's even available, I would almost lean towards that more. But let's say, for example, maybe wearing a lighter fitting belt and have suspenders on, so you have all the tools and resources you need at your waist side, but also something that can help hold it up going across the shoulders will also help incredibly well.
If they haven't made that yet, we should make that. I think we can make some money off that.
That'd be cool. You're here first.
The first ever suspender belt system for construction workers. We're gonna make that.
Yeah. Or if someone feels more ambitious, by all means, like this would be a hobby interest.
Just give us a shout out. Just give us a shout out.
Perfect. Yeah. No. Yeah. That's when Doc brought that up. I thought that was super important. And yeah, we see it quite often.
Doc, I know we talk about this a lot too, but I right off the belt system, but braces, I'm sure people are thinking about too. Are they needed?
Yeah, it'll depend on the job. Now, if you start, especially lifting and twisting, obviously, if you've been in this line of work for a while, you're going to know that it can cause injury. Most commonly, it's disc injuries, whether it's you're constantly lifting and twisting, or you're constantly having a twisting motion in a specific same direction over and over again, day on end. Eventually, it's going to lead to your spine, rib cage, and whole torso structure, body structure, quite frankly, to compensate. And that's going to lead to degeneration. It's going to lead to other symptoms of nerves being pinched off, going to various organs or your body from there. So ideally, when you have a belt or a brace or anything that'll support your back, You definitely want to be able to utilize it if needed, especially lifting heavier weights and especially with twisting. It's not saying it's going to help diminish the potential harm, but it will help redistribute load and pressure from the small area and segments of, for most people, lower back, to distribute that out to more to global, wider fashion. That's also why when movers specifically, they move objects, obviously, for longer periods of time, they have belts. So it's the help for the risk of injury moving forward. But that's where then it comes into counteractive movements to the opposite way that you typically would, is where I'd lean towards from there. So if you have back braces, awesome. For some jobs needed long term, but I definitely wouldn't suggest for most people to rely on braces long term, because then it forces the small intrinsic muscles and tissues along your spine to rely on the brace, and then it can also lead to injury from there. You need a mixture thereof, or a transition from back braces to then working out of those, rehabbing. But
and if you're using the brace for pain management, I would ask you to go back to the point in this podcast where we talked about healing your injury efficiently and 100%, because then if you have to rely on a brace to manage your pain, you didn't put in the appropriate amount of effort to heal that injury in the first place. And relying on that brace is only going to make it worse, like you said, Doc, because it's going to break down over time when you rely on that kind of support system. Instead, you should be building up the appropriate tissues to maintain that part of the body without reliance of the brace.
No, that was perfect. And I know the last one we have is work ergonomic situations and equipment. If you can enhance or have more, increase your productivity in your job, if there's any equipment or tools that you can utilize or invest in, whether it's clothing, attire, whether it's certain areas of equipment, obviously there might be a cost factor to that, but that would also be something that's try to pay attention to where the common either tools or things you utilize on a daily basis. Are you able to upgrade those to improve your efficiency or time, productivity, or less damage on the body? If so, I would absolutely look into that. We touched on the belts. We're trying to go broad scope because each job is a little different, a little specific. It's relied on you for your awareness from that. But yeah, Doc, is there anything you have on ergonomic situations, equipment from there?
Oh, no, I think we can jump into tools. Body maintenance, really the only one that I wanted to touch on, which I already have, was obviously getting enough protein. That alone will really help to maintain the tissues, manage the breakdown of them if you are working. And even if you want to try to build a little bit, overcome injury, enough protein is going to be crucial for those kinds of things. So getting enough protein. Doc, is there anything else before we want to jump into the training regimen and exercise?
No, you hit everything quite well. So I can just go dive right into some of the training stuff. And some of this we've touched on, but the importance for the maintenance of the body long term. When we look at a broad term spectrum, we want to see, okay, what are the areas that are either least trained, which have a high risk of injury, a high risk of either damage to oneself. And that's going back to training the joints. Now, again, going back to the body series, if you have to go back to any of those podcasts, awesome. I know Doc did an awesome job showing shoulder workspace. It's moving every joint through the biggest circle you possibly can slowly. If you have sharp discomfort, move around it. Don't move into sharp pain, achy, sore, dull, tight. Tension is okay for a little bit of time. Tightness, you can work around quite a bit more from there. But moving every joint, whether it's joint of your thumb, whether it's joint of your fingers together and apart, if you're gripping things for longer periods of time, are you able to bring your hands, fingers into extension and move into the complete opposite way, which I'll get to here in a second. But moving every joint that you're utilizing as a warm-up is so incredibly important. Blood flow, like we said previously, nervous system's communication for less guarding tightness. There's going to be less pain. You can build up your mobility from there. And then going into kind of what I was just reiterating, counteracting movements. So gripping, moving the joints and areas into the opposite way in which you would hold a position for longer periods of time. Especially if you're working in front of you, most of the time your hands are going to be working downwards or your palms facing down? So are you able to open up and have your palms facing upwards, forwards, the complete opposite direction? Are you able to move your elbow and straighten completely straight to completely bent? And watch, if you guys that are not watching on the video, when you straighten your arm, when you look at your upper arm versus your lower arm, does your lower portion of your arm, your forearm, does it deviate outwards? If so, there's more than likely a lot of tension either built up in the shoulder going down the inside portion, or you have a lot of contracture and or tendonitis, or just a lot of tightness on the outside portion of your elbow. Brachioradialis is a very common one from there for grip strength. So how long can you spend time with your palm facing upwards, externally rotating or twisting your hand outwards? How can you bring your arms completely straight and spend some time, maybe squeeze and contract all the muscles of your arm lightly at length as you're opening up? And then can you move slowly while twisting your arm outwards to a short position or a bicep curl? Can you spend time opening your system up? It's going to be the same thing. If you work in front of you, can you train back more? Are you able to train your rhomboids and or the tissues from your shoulder blades on your back to your lower back? Maybe adding in counteractive twisting movements backwards, or a medicine ball, or even outside of work, picking up a weight and throwing it slowly over your shoulder. Pay attention to obviously not strain yourself there, but different ways that you can, like we said, counteractive certain movements that you typically find yourself in, either doing it the complete opposite way or paying attention to the joints and the small muscles and tissues. Now, anytime, like we said previously, you bring a joint, so if you're watching bending my elbow like a bicep curl, if you do that movement over and over again, it's going to bleed a lot of energy to the muscles. Now, if you do that repetitive work over and over again, you might potentially lead to tendonitis or damage to the tendons, ligaments that would attach to the muscles, either muscle to the bone or bone to bone. Now, how can you build up those structures? That's where you either lengthen the joint. So, for example, the arm, it would be strain your arm and try to squeeze all the muscles in your arm at length, especially with your palm open and hand extended. Just better use of your time for most people with gripping objects. Or if you have popping, clicking in the hip, are you able to move your hip through the biggest range of motion possible? If you feel popping, clicking, can you hold a position, whether it's on the ground, and then just squeeze that muscle roughly around where it pops, and then slowly move in and out of that area as you're contracting lightly while bringing your leg back and around. That's another good way. So it's managing the areas that are not commonly trained, ligaments and tendons, through isometric contractions, squeezes, or eccentrics, or slowly lengthening a joint or a joint region from short to long, and then applying a contraction at length. That would be another good way. Or blood flow, like we said, training the joints, workspaces. So a lot of this stuff we've had in previous podcasts, and I know we keep saying that, but go and look from there. The couple other ones I want to touch on is anytime you've had a past injury, it's going to leave long-term anatomical change to the body. So if you're in pain or out of pain, you still have to keep working on that area to build the resiliency of not only the muscles, but the ligaments and tendons, the joints around that area, for blood flow in and out, and for your nervous system's connection to that area on a consistent basis, and then building the habits from there on a consistent basis as well. And then the last one I have is scheduling and thinking out the process. So this is taking a page from habits from our first episode. Anytime we want to build up a habit, or for more importantly, probably for you guys in this episode, is breaking a habit. Whether you're trying to get away from going to the gas station, or trying to limit the amount of sodas or pop you drink. One, are you able to substitute out? And two, are you able to be aware? So once, like, you have to have awareness. So whatever it is that you want to break, ideally you have to either have that in the front of your mind. So either changing your phone, like saver screen of you writing down what you want to change. So you see on a continual basis, whether it's you write down that and you see it on your dashboard, on your car, on your work. So anytime you go into something that you don't want to do, you have to recognize it. You have to accept it's okay. It's just a habit that you're trying to break, and you have to give yourself some grace. And then from there, immediately after, either change the setting, change your place, change your mindset to where, okay, I'm going to stop doing this. I'm not going to continue doing this. And then can I add in or do an action of some sort, whether it's, even if it's like either tapping your leg or tapping your foot, just so you can detach it with an action, which will then break apart that cycle in your mind. So if you subsequently start either tapping your foot or whatever the small action is, it can be so simple and so easy. Once you do that, your mind is automatically going to think of that past habit and of that thing that you want to break. And then even then you can still build up. So it helps awareness from just that small action, but you want to stay consistent with that. And ideally you will probably want to keep that same thing. So you're able to not necessarily completely remember that what you want to break, but to be aware of, this is something that I did, something I want to move away from. And then once you notice yourself not doing that habit, not going to the gas station, then you can build in around other habits that you already have. So for example, if you're brushing your teeth, are you able to either listen to an audiobook at the same time? Are you able to start thinking about your day and just thinking about the processes and what you want to accomplish prior to will help with processing in your brain, which then helps neuroplasticity and the change of learning something or changing something new. Long story short, to break a habit, be aware of it, give yourself grace, apply an action in something simple and easy and stay consistent right afterwards, and then stop doing whatever it is you're doing. To create a habit, build off of what you typically have and what you consistently do. Brush your teeth, you typically go to bed this way at this time, and then add on a small habit that you want to add in around something that you already have ingrained into you.
Beautiful.
So those are those are ways that you can build and break down habits, which will also help for your body maintenance moving forward, whether it's added in body maintenance work. Let's say, for example, you want to work out or go for a walk. That'd be a perfect place to start after work. When you get home, if you think that, okay, maybe I go grab a beer, go sit down on the couch. Well, maybe instead of grabbing a beer, sitting down on the couch, put the keys down and then change out of clothes and then just get up, start walking, whether it's you're in your house or just go outside and just start moving around, or just detach what you typically normally do, just to break up the monogamy, if we will. And then you can add on from there. Or for a huge thing, gas station, going back to building up the habit of prepping foods for the week. It's something that you feel so passionate about. You can also purchase meals online. They just send it to you and you just put it in the microwave and there you go. It's just so simple, but instead grab that or prep that meal, have it with you, have all the tools and resources, whether it's a heat container, ice container, and then so you have it so you don't necessarily have to go, and then staying consistent with it and monitor yourself on a weekly, a monthly basis from there. Those are going to be some of the better ways that can help for the body maintenance outside of just doing effortful work.
Beautiful.
But yeah, Doc, anything?
No, that's great. And I think the Habit Podcast is something that I think if you are more interested in, go please look at it. We did a great job of breaking that down. And no, I think they're going to, I think those of you that are listening that appreciate what we said today, we really thank you for listening. We do hope that this was helpful. I know that it's a little bit of a unique podcast, and so we're hoping that these do really deliver value for you. And I think what we have in here, please listen and understand this is stuff that we've already seen come into the clinic. And now we're trying to say, how can we stop this from getting so severe and so intense? Can we actually help you outside of the clinic, not have to get to that point in time, because we really don't want you to have to get to that state of health where you're reliant on so many other things to manage your pain, and we don't want that for you either. We hope that this was valuable for you guys, and just thank you guys so much for listening.
Yes. Like, subscribe, share to anyone who has had or continues to go through manual labor jobs, strenuous on their body. This is perfect for every one of them, whether you're in construction or not. And yeah, by all means.
Until next time, guys. See ya.
Woo!
Disclaimer: the content provided in this health podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast is solely at your own risk. The creators and hosts of this podcast are not responsible for any actions or decisions you may take based on the information presented.
Thanks for joining us on The Functional Code. For more evidence-based health insights, subscribe, rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, your journey to a healthier you begins with understanding the Functional Code. Until next time, stay well, stay informed, and embrace the science of living well.